Hey, it's another stupid shader tree fight on the internet, and we all love stupid shader tree fights on the internet. And there's nothing else to do right now because MODO 801 isn't out, and there's no previews, and there's no videos, and it's boring. So let's all fight about the shader tree. Honestly, and the shader tree can be confusing. I always think of the shader tree as sort of an event horizon, right? You can have like a black hole where the event horizon, correct, is when you are so close that you can no longer escape. There's no velocity you can achieve that could escape the event horizon, and you're automatically going to get sucked in. Now, that may not actually be an event horizon because I didn't Google this before I made this video, so maybe I'm wrong, and I'm sure I'll be corrected, but it's good enough for me. So with the shader tree, there's a certain event horizon where you're like, I'm not really sure, top up, bottom down, why do I have to arrange material layers of different channels in a certain way? And oh wait, I get it. Oh, okay, so now I'm in the event horizon and I understand the shader tree. So that is where we're trying to go with this. So right now, the shader tree is as simple as it can be. It's just a base material and a base shader. And a base material is nothing but just a big old bag of channels, right? Just a package full of channels. We got a bunch of channels here, and there's a bunch more channels you don't even see. They're all in there. And those channels have some initial values applied to them. Most of them are 0 over here. You got 20% there and 50% there, and you got white there and white there. And those are just constants. They're just being applied to these polygons in the scene. And you can see that over here in the preview window, right? Look at diffuse amount. There it is, 50% right there. Diffuse amount, 50%. So those are just constants. There's no shading going on. There's no, what we would call rendering going on. There's no shadows or reflections or anything being calculated. All of these values, all of these channels right here are being passed up from the bottom up to the base shader. And the base shader is a little program that runs, and it sees all these channels that are coming in, and then it takes things into account like all of these channels over here, your render settings, lights in the scene, environments, and other geometry. And it does all the hard work of rendering, and it gives us these shadows and the specular lights and everything else, but its starting point is all these base channels, okay? So basically what you have, let me make a new image here because that one sucked. Here's our shader tree, here's our base material, and it's just, a big bag of channels, big package of channels. And those channels are all flowing upwards, evaluated from the bottom up. Evaluate first, pass them up. Passing those up to the shader, right? Here's our shader. And those values are being sucked into the shader, and the hard work of shading is done by the shader. So, what you can, of course, do in MODO is then, instead of just having these constant numbers to, deal with, to apply values to your channels, you can use procedural textures to apply values. You can use gradients to apply values. You can use images to apply values. Or you could also just apply values with these little numbers right here. So I want to apply me some values to these channels. So I'm going to use a procedural texture and dots, which is my very favorite procedural texture. And I'm going to apply some dots to these values in a diffuse color channel. So all I did, and again, we're evaluating from the bottom up, right? So initially I had just like a white color down here in the diffuse color channel. These are all channels. And now I just added another layer on top of that, another big bag of channels for dots colors. And so I'm evaluating from the bottom up. I'm saying, hey, I've got white color on the diffuse color channel here. And then, whoops, I just bumped into something else. It's actually not white, it's actually black and white dots, and I'm going to feed that on to the shader, right? So that's how it works in terms of going from the bottom up. And so really we're just going to keep on expanding on this idea here. And so where people sort of say it's like Photoshop is you can add another set of values. I'm just going to use a procedural texture instead of an image or a number, and we'll just use checkers. And Let's make these a different color just so it's easier to sort of visualize. And yes, like Photoshop, if one layer is on top of the other layer and they're the same channel, and in Photoshop they're pretty much always the same channel, so that's easier to see, then yeah, it's going to obscure it, right? And you can blend in between it. So back over here in our little chart, you know, I've just added yet another little guy here, and this is checker. And you know, I can dial down the opacity of this. I can you know, change the blending mode. And again, we're just evaluating, you know, from the bottom up. So we've got the white, we've got the checkers, and then when I hit this, you know, I'm seeing the dots. Then when I hit this guy here, I'm seeing the checkers, right? But maybe the opacity is down a little bit. Okay, so and it's going to feed that information up to the shader, just like we've been doing. Where people get confused, and they do get confused, is if I add let me just add another texture here, we'll say a grid, and I'm going to apply this to diffuse amount. So this is a completely, whoops, not the checker, the grid, I want diffuse amount. And so it's a completely different channel. It's not affecting these two channels because it's a completely different channel. And quite frankly, it should be shuffled over to the side, right? So here's diffuse amount, filling up that little channel bucket on that big bag of channels. But you know, we're trying to save space here, so we just keep them all in one stack. And you know, diffuse amount has nothing to do, I could put it in between these two guys. It has nothing to do with these two channels. It's completely ignored because in reality it's not just a single stack, it's a multi-lane highway. And diffuse value is different than diffuse color. So, but it's a little weird if you're not used to that, and you're not visualizing this in its own little shuffled over to the side here in its own sort of lane. So people do get confused. And the problem I see with some shader trees is I always like to keep my stuff together, right? I don't like to mix my socks and my underwear. I want to keep my diffuse color guys right next to each other because, you know, they're affecting each other. But I'll see somebody's shader tree and they'll have this diffuse amount here, they'll have an image for spec amount, they'll have a gradient for reflection amount, and they'll have some bump images, and they'll have like 30 images and procedural textures and gradients in between of just random channels all mixed up with other channels. Then this other diffuse channel will be way up here, like with 30 things in between it, and they don't understand why it's affecting this guy down here. And keep your shit together, your stuff together. Sorry, it's a family show. Keep your stuff together. In fact, some people like to group stuff. They'll just hit Control-G and group it, and they'll just, you know, call this whatever, diffuse color. If that helps you and you're just starting out, then maybe do that. You know, MODO 701 also has, you can color code stuff, right? So I would grab these two guys and say, hey, diffuse color is pink and diffuse amount is blue, and reflection color is green. And maybe that helps you. So even when they're like this, you're like, and there's 30 things in between here, I'm like, oh yeah, right, they're the same color, and that's why this guy up here is affecting this guy down here. So, you know, it does help to organize your shader tree. So everybody out there who doesn't organize your shader tree, that's your first problem. You're not organizing your shader tree. So let me flip those guys off. And so that's kind of where we're at here, right? So the simplest possible scenario. What MODO lets you do, and what Photoshop kind of does with masking, right? With Photoshop, you can have layer masks. Well, in MODO, one of the reasons they called these things masks way back in 101 is it's sort of they were attempting to create a sort of a 2D analogy to masking, and what I'm doing here. And in MODO, a mask is just like a pointer. You're pointing to an object or a polygon tag or a group of objects. You know, the typical way to do it is just say you're adding material. I'm creating a material P tag, and we'll call that ball A, green. I already got it there. So, and MODO just creates a group. It's pointing towards ball A, right there, ball A. There's these polygons right here. If I look at my info, they have a ball A material tag. They don't have any part tags yet, except default, and they don't have any selection set tags. All they have is this material tag, and that's what this group is pointing to. So again, it's a little different than Photoshop, but if you look at it like this, that's kind of Photoshop-y, right? Looks a lot like the layer masks in Photoshop. I don't have Photoshop open right now, but if you want to show a layer mask in Photoshop or a channel in Photoshop, you get the same sort of effect. And so, you know, that's why we call them masks, and that's sort of the genesis of that. But, you know, I don't think you really need that analogy to see how it works, because all we're really doing here is we're just setting up some containers to point to stuff in the scene. So I'm pointing to these polygons, and I'm using a material p tag to point to these polygons. I can also use a selection set p tag to point to these polygons. So I'm going to assign a selection set and call it stupid ball B, right? And now it's not showing up. I'm not getting an automatic group popping up in the shader tree like when I do a material p tag, because material p tags really are for isolating parts of your scene to apply values to, because that's what I'm doing. I'm isolating a part of my scene with this material p tag just so I can apply some values to it. But you can use selection sets, and you can use them for really cool things. And so I just add a group, and I say, hey, I'm going to point it to a selection set, and that one thing I made there, stupid ball B, now I have it, right? And I'm going to throw a material in there. So, in fact, I'm not even going to do that yet. So right now, there's nothing in there. So I go back over here. I have another sort of package here. I have a package that's isolated to the green ball, right? Ball A. And ball A is its own sort of package. Okay, I'm tearing it up one. So there's a space underneath here. I'm going to tear it up. It's not overlaid with this guy. It's not overlaid with the base material here because it's isolated, the ball A here. But it's up one because the base material here, just like the base shader, covers everything like a blanket on the top. The base material with no sort of isolation, no group isolating it, is covering everything. If I had scale tools, I would just stretch this guy out, but it's covering everything like the ground here on the bottom, right? So there is my base material right here, and there's my shader up here, and this ball A and stupid ball B, I'm just going to kind of tear up a little bit. It's not overlaying this. In fact, if I mix, there's nothing in here right now, so basically, when I'm shading, I'm evaluating the base material here, right? And then I'm bumping into this, and I'm getting nothing. It's empty, so it's just feeding those values we started with down here, the base material at the bottom up evaluation, remember? Feeding those in the shader. Over here with stupid ball, let me just delete these guys to make this a little bit easier. With ball A, we're getting these base material values right here, and we're bumping into this container full of its own values, right? A new package of values. And so we're hitting that new package of values, and this one happens to have a green color on the diffuse channel. And so it's got that diffuse color channel, green color there, and it's feeding that onto the shader. So so that's how this is sort of working. You see this multi-lane highway being built up, even though we're just seeing one lane here. Not one lane, but a condensed lane, one line here. It's really a multi-lane highway. And so if I drop something, I don't have to drop a material in stupid ball B. I just want to say, hey, you know what? I only want to change the color. So I'm just going to drop a constant. I just want to change the color. I just want to make it, blue. And I want it, so in here, I'm not adding a whole package, a material, a big bag of channels. I'm just adding one channel. Just all I'm adding is this one channel, just one. Oops, breaking down my color coding here. So I'm just have this diffuse color channel in here, right? So, we're evaluating. We've got the base shader, which is a white color channel. It bumps into my blue color channel, right? In this isolated package here, and it sends that up. But everything else, diffuse amount, specular color, it's just, there's nothing in that package to obscure the base layer. So it's just feeding up these so if I make this reflective, right? So let's make this 50% reflective. You'll see that I'm not getting that in my green guy here because this guy is isolated. It's an isolated, it has a material in there, so all those channels are isolated. But this guy right here, stupid ball B, has no material. It doesn't have a big bag of channels. It has one channel in it, and so that reflection amount is passing right through it up to the base shader, right? It's passing right through it up to the shader, and it's not being obscured by any channels in there. If I dropped a material in there, then I would be obscuring that, right? So I drop in the material there, and that channel, that big bag of channels, that reflection channel is now being obscured. So I just blocked out that reflection channel with this constant value of 0. So there's no reflection there anymore. See? That's how it's working. So we've got this multi-lane highway thing going on there. So now we understand how isolating things works, right? I can isolate this guy with an item mask, right? So, whoops. So I just right-click and I say, hey, I want an item mask. Create item mask. And now I've got the torus and an item mask. And I just gave it a whole bunch of shaders. And I'm going to make this guy orangey. Okay? And so this last guy, let's set apart. So I press F2 for my modeling guy here and go to polygon and say set part and say blah, 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 ball C. So there's a part there, and then I can, since it's a part and not a material P tag, I'm not going to get the automatic group in here pointing to it, but it's available to me if I add a group and I go to part, and it's going to show me all the parts in the scene, and there's blah, blah, CC, blah, 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 C part, and let's add a material to it. Okay. Make this guy, I don't know, purple maybe. And so, again, so I just added a couple new things here. I added, tear this up, I added a part with a whole bunch of a part P tag. I isolated off these polygons with a part P tag. And I threw a material in there, so it's got its own bunch of channels. And I isolated off this torus with a item mask, and I threw a material in there, so it's got its bunch of shaders. So all these guys are bumping into that and being overwritten before going to that shader. Okay, so that's how that's working. I'm just saying, all these groups are doing is grabbing a slice of this scene, whether it's an entire item, a selection set of polygons, or a material P tag set of polygons, or a part P tag set of polygons. And you can get a little bit complicated, right? So if I grab this guy and grab a loop of these guys, and I'm going to assign a selection set to it, right? So select, assign selection set. I'm going to assign the stupid ball B a selection set to it. I just did, but why didn't that get overwritten with the blue in stupid ball B? Well, if you look over here at my sort of tiered thing, this guy, so I know this is getting a little confusing. That's stupid ball B. That's the material tag, and this guy is this is ball A, material tag, and this is stupid ball B, and this is, what do we got here? Here's my torus item mask, and over here is my, up at the top, blah 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 C guy. So right now, the polygons in this ball have 2 P tags on it, right? I've got a selection set and a part. So my part is up here, and my selection set, which is just this little strip, is down here, right? Here's my little group that is pointing to that selection set. So the order of operations does matter here, because right now this is higher up on the tree, and it's covering up that when they have polygons in common, items in common, parts of the scene in common, then we do have a layering order here. So you can imagine that this guy is only on top of this guy when they have some polygons in common, some tags in common. So he's really kind of covering up this guy as well. So if I were to move this above that, then it's going to show up, right? Because I just took this guy right here and I moved him up above. Actually, it's not this guy, it's this guy. See, this is what happens when you get confused. It gets confusing when you're... Anyway, so if I was editing this, I would edit all that out, but I'm not going to, and redo it, but I think you get it, right? So order matters if these containers are pointing to the same stuff. If they're not pointing to the same stuff, then they're basically sort of in separate superhighways with multiple lanes, all on their own road, right? So each is its own superhighway. When you do something like add another shader, so I'm going to add here we go. Here's the hard part, everybody. I am adding a shader to stupid ball B, which includes these polygons here and these polygons here. These polygons here have two tags. They've got the purple tag here and the blue tag, but the blue tag is on top of the purple tag, so we see the blue. If this was underneath, we would not see the blue, like as thusly. Oh, see, I dropped a output in there. I want to drop an output in there. I want to drop a shader in there. Okay, what just happened? I dropped a shader in there. Nothing happened. Why? Because the shader I dropped in there, and here I'm gonna have to edit this on the fly because I've gotten too big. So my base shader covering everything like a blanket. It's not in a mask. It's not in a group. It's not being isolated. It's just a big blanket on top, right? And my base material is a ground on the bottom. And yes, I've got a shader in which group? In the stupid ball B. Yeah, I've got a shader in there. But guess what? This evaluation is hitting that shader and saying, hey, there's all these cool shader values. But it just keeps on going, and it hits this shader up here, and all these values are overridden. So what do? We move this above the base shader. Okay, the infamous move it above the base shader. Well, what does that do? Well, all it does is it takes this guy right here and, hey, wait, watch this. I can use something. Yeah, and it moves it above this shader. Now, the shader in here isn't affecting all these guys because it's contained within this mask, these boundaries, right? It's contained within this group here, this group which is pointing to these selection sets, stupid ball B. So that shader is only affecting stupid ball B, but it's above this shader. So when I'm evaluating, I'm hitting this shader and nothing. But then, boom, I hit all these new materials right here and their own shader right there. So it gets these shader properties. So I could do things like, hey, I actually don't want to see that. So that's how that works, right? And think of this render guy here as the tip of the top of the iceberg here. So here's my render guy. So everything ultimately goes up there. So we can just kind of continue evaluating. We'll call this this render guy here we'll just call that my image. So that's what we've got here, right? So it's not just a bunch of layers, because it is more complicated than that. It's a multi-lane highway, right? It's got a floor with a base material, and it's got a ceiling with the base shader, and you can move stuff around, and order does matter. But it's not just a bunch of colors, it's a bunch of channels, right? All kinds of channels, and you can isolate and dice up your scene with these groups. And not only is your scene diced up with these groups, but these groups can share the same parts of the scene, just like we did with these two balls here. They're sharing these polygons, right, in different groups, and so the group on top overwrites the one underneath because we're evaluating from the bottom up. So we're dicing up our scene by entire items, like the torus item mask, or material p tags, like green ball, or part p tags, like blue, or selection set p tags, like blue ball, or part p tags, like purple ball. You can even do entire groups of items. So I can grab these two guys and go to my group list here and say, hey, new group, and we'll call it, hey, group. And inside this group, we've got, whoops, I don't need that guy. Well, we will remove that guy. So we've got a couple of objects in this group, and we can dice up our scene based on entire groups of objects. So I just I throw a group in here, and I want it to evaluate, so I want it underneath that shader, right? I don't want to throw some empty group up here with no shader in it. It's just there's no place for that to go, right? There's no shader. It has to hit a shader. So I'm going to put it underneath my base shader, and I'm going to find a group of items, my hey group, right? And so it's looking at these guys now. So what's cool is, and where this does beat a node system, is it's so easy just to go like that. And I've just disconnected a whole crap load of nodes like that, right? And so I can have my hey now group, and I can add a layer in there. We'll just call it a material, and we'll give this, what color haven't I used yet? Maybe pinky pink. And since it's, I've got them pink now. A big package of materials. I'm getting all those, or a big package of, a big bag of channels. They're all right there. They're on top of everything underneath it. But let's say, you know what? I actually like that that green ball. So I'm going to pull that guy above it. So, this guy is now, I've moved this guy down here and I've moved, the green ball one up here. And it's, once you get this, that you have different channels and you have different ways of dicing up your scene and pointing to those little bits you've diced up with these groups here, and that each of these groups can contain similar parts of the scene you diced up, and the one on top is the one that's going to pass those properties contained within that group onto the shaders. And that, this whole moving above the base shader, you're just sort of isolating that little dice of the scene into its own little package that can be read by this little shader program away from the rest of the scene. And you can give it special properties or whatever. You can do a lot of cool stuff. I can take my Hey group right here, and I could move it above this guy, and I can, let's give him a shader. And you know what? I want to put any materials in there. I just want to get a render output, right? So I just want an alpha of those two guys. And so I can do that. I could throw that in there. And I just want this guy to be an alpha. Now I've got an alpha of just those two balls right there, right? You could view this wherever, but there's my alpha of those two balls, right? Right there, two balls. All right, so and so you can do really cool stuff. And if you look at a scene, like a really busy scene, but the shader tree, once you hit that event horizon and you grok it, it becomes pretty easy. And so here's, I've got a bunch of special passes here, right? And these are just pointing to selection sets, because you know what? I want to get all my text on this guy, right? All my text and all these buttons, all those polygons are just a selection set with an alpha in it, because I want that special pass. And by the way, I need to color code that, bad Greg, because I like to color code my stuff. And here's some green things. If it's green, that means it has multiple options in there for me. So I look at my, sliders. I think I have this open in Photoshop somewhere. So yeah, these are all different colors down here. So, we call these the jelly bean LEDs. And each one of these guys can be any number of different colors. And so I've got them all in there, and I can just pick my color by using this evaluation from the bottom up sort of methodology, right? So, if you look at this scene, I'm just going to shift click this. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. A lot of stuff in there. In fact, I haven't even gotten to my library yet. Oh, wait, here's my library. Here's more stuff, right? That's all still library. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there, and there's a lot of items in here. This is let's look at my item list here. Not a small item list either. MODO handles it just fine, and the shader tree is just fine if you're organized. I can't imagine opening this up in Maya and seeing, I don't know, 2,000 shader balls. I mean, that's easier. I can't, the text, I have to zoom in just to see the text. Here I could see the text, pretty easily, right? On all these guys. So, I'm like closing everything. So anyway, yeah, it's a matter of preference, but don't tell me that shader tree breaks down to large scenes, because I use it in large scenes all the time. All I do is name my shit, right? And keep it organized. It's like a disk directory. Do you just, randomly throw crap all over your hard drive? Well, if you do, you're probably gonna have a hard time keeping track of things. But if you make your list nice and you grok the sort of, event horizon of the shader tree, so I know things are in different. I don't have to see things in different tiered channels, and different tiered sort of packages. Just kind of know that's how it works. It's actually pretty easy. I didn't even get to the library, which I don't know if anybody uses. It's sort of flew under the radar, but it's a great feature, right? I can just throw my throw a material in the library there, and it works as a reference. So I can, let me just throw like just throw some gold in the library, and I'm saying, okay, this guy right here, this toroid, I want it to be gold, so I can throw my gold in there, and it's referencing this gold library material here, which I can mess around and change or do whatever I want. And my computer is lagging. And then, of course, I can add stuff on top of that reference. Let's say I just want to add an image map, or let's add my dots, because I love my dots, right? So I got my dots, and I'm just going to hit a 0 there and on the alpha, and so I get some red dots on this guy. And maybe some year, what am I doing here? Extended passes. Put it back to draft. So anyway, you can kind of, let me just change that to, or I can instance this. Again, instancing stuff is nice in the, let's just do reflection color here. Make it a little more obvious, right? So, it's nice shader tree stuff, right? You can instance things, Instancing something isn't necessarily any harder than dragging that noodle to another input and having both those parameters controlled by one input. It's same idea, just a little different. But all right, so my hour is gone, and I got to go home and eat dinner. So that's all. Bye.